Today we're going to learn about first conjugation verbs in the present active indicative. Now let's put the terms present active indicative out of our minds for a second. We'll come back to those. Let's delve into the verbs themselves first. Every verb in Latin has four principal parts, and they each tell you a little something about the verb. Here we have the verb to call, voco, vocari, vocavi, vocatum, and we're just going to number the principal parts. Voco is the first, vocari is the second, vocavi is the third, and vocatum is the fourth. And we're just going to be working with the first two today. Now voco, the first principal part, tells you one thing and one thing alone. It tells you the first person singular in the present. It tells you I call. Then we move to the second principal part, which is more important. This is called the infinitive. And we're going to use this infinitive to form our verb. So let's work with conjugating our verb. In front of you, you have a verb chart. You'll get very used to seeing these. Up top, you have all four principal parts of your verb, voco, vocare, the verb to call. Now, in red, you see the first principal part, voco. And as we said before, this principal part is very specific. It tells you one thing and one thing alone. It tells you the first person singular of the verb. And that is the I form of the verb, which is down here. I call, voco. Now we move on to the second principal part. That is the infinitive. And this is the important part. To get the stem for the rest of your verb endings, you go to your infinitive and you drop off that RE. That leaves us with VOCA. And this is the stem that we're going to put all our other verb endings onto. Here you can see all your other verb endings. So to that stem, VOCA, we add S, T, mus, tis, and ent. So here you have just your endings, O, S, T, mus, tis, ent, and you need to memorize these. Remember that the O, the first person singular ending, is the only exception. You go to that first principal part to get that stem. For all of the other endings, S, T, mus, tis, ent, you go to your second principal part, the infinitive, drop off your RE, and that gives you the stem to add those endings onto. Now in Latin, these endings are used much like pronouns in English. There's no pronoun that you're going to put in front of these. There's no I, he, we, she. These endings signify who is doing the verb, as you can see in this next chart. So voco, first person singular, is I call. That O ending tells you it's I call. Vocas, second person singular. That S ending tells you it's you singular call. Vocat, that T ending in the third person singular tells you it's he, she, or it calls. And the same thing with mus, tis, and ent in the plural. Now let's practice these for a second. In front of you, you have three verbs that have been conjugated. What I would like you to do is write the person and number of each of the following verbs and translate them. Remember, the person is first person, second person, third person. So first person if you are personally involved in the action. Second person if you're talking directly to someone who's involved in the action. And third person if you're talking about a party not there and part of the action. And number is simply singular and plural. This will be a good time for you to pause the recording and take a few minutes to work on these. Alright, let's review. So, remember, habitamus has that mus ending, mus. That is the first person plural, we live. Laudas has that s ending on the stem. That's second person singular, you praise. And finally, amant has that nt ending, which is third person plural, they love. Now that we've learned our endings and what they signify, we're going to come back to these terms, present active indicative, from the beginning of the PowerPoint presentation. Now each of these tells you something about the verb in question. So let's start with the present. The present is our tense, and the tense is going to tell you when a verb occurs. For now, we'll be only working with the present tense, which means the thing is happening now. So we're going to translate it as in the case of woko, wokare. Woko, I call, I am calling, or I do call. In all of those cases, our verb is occurring now. Next, the term active is our voice. And for a greater part of this year, we'll only be working with the active voice. And we say something is in the active voice when the subject is doing the action of the verb. For example, the boy ran down the street. In that case, the boy is doing the running. He is doing the action of the verb, and that is what the active voice indicates. And finally, our third term, indicative, is the mood. And the indicative mood is also something we'll be working with for most of this year. And the indicative mood simply is used when you are stating a fact. That concludes our lesson on the present active indicative of the first conjugation. Now, let's just talk about our takeaways from this lesson. There are two things that you really need to remember. The first is, of course, your verb endings and how to form the verb itself. So remember, our endings are o, st, mus, tis, ent. You're going to add these onto the proper stem, and you're going to need to know how to translate these. So woko, I call. Wokas, you call. Wokat, he, she, it calls. Wokamus, we call. Wokatus, y'all call. Wokant, they call. The other thing that's going to be imperative for you to remember are your terms. And three terms that you really need to memorize are the infinitive, which is the to form of the verb. In this case, wokare is to call. And it's the second principal part that you're given. You also have to memorize what person is. And the terms for person are either first, second, or third. And it tells you who's doing the verb. And of course, number, which is either singular or plural.